The word salary comes from salt. That is not a coincidence or a linguistic curiosity to skip past. It is a direct fossil of an economy where salt was so valuable that Roman soldiers were, according to enduring tradition, partly compensated
Use it wisely,
in it.
soldier.
Salt has started riots, funded empires, and eventually helped topple
Ensure
one
the
of the
quota is met
largest
this
colonial governments on Earth. This is the story of the most ordinary substance in your kitchen and the extraordinary violence and power it commanded for most of human history. Salt's value comes from something almost embarrassingly simple. The human body cannot survive without sodium, and for most of history, salt was the only reliable, transportable way to get it in concentrated form. It was also the single most effective method available for preserving meat and fish before refrigeration existed, meaning entire civilizations depended on salt not for flavor,
Ensure the quota is
but
met this
for
month.
basic survival through winters and long sea voyages. Whoever controlled salt controlled something.
We must consider the
Civilization
borders.
could not function without.
I agree with this plan.
And that made it one of the
provisions
earliest
are not
commodities
enough.
to be systematically taxed,
Let us review the map.
monopolized, and fought over. Ancient China was among the first civilizations to recognize salt's political potential. As early as the 7th century BCE, the state of Qi imposed a government monopoly on salt production, generating enormous state revenue by controlling both production and distribution. By the Han Dynasty, salt and iron monopolies had become so central to imperial finances that a formal government debate on the subject, recorded in a text known as the Discourses on Salt and Iron, survives today as one of the earliest documented policy arguments over state control of essential commodities, with officials arguing over whether government monopoly power over salt served the public good or simply enriched the state at ordinary people's expense. In the ancient Mediterranean world, salt's importance shaped infrastructure directly. The Via Salaria, or Salt Road, was one of the oldest and most important roads in Roman Italy, built specifically to transport salt from coastal saltworks near Rome inland to the rest of the peninsula. The word salary, referring to a soldier's pay, is widely believed by historians to trace back to the Latin word for salt, though the exact mechanism is debated. Some scholars argue Roman soldiers received a literal salt ration, or allowance,
Down with the
as part of their
taxes!
compensation.
Long live the
while
revolution!
Others suggest the word simply reflects salt status
Overturn the
as a
tables!
benchmark of monetary value at the time, a substance so universally needed that its worth became a natural reference point for wages generally. Either way, the linguistic fossil endures. The word we still use for a paycheck today is built directly on the ancient value of salt. Salt's value was not limited to Rome. Across West Africa, salt was so scarce and so essential in regions far from any coastline or salt deposit that it was, for centuries, literally traded ounce for ounce against gold. Trans-Saharan trade routes moved massive quantities of salt mined from deposits like those at Tagaza,
Keep moving, we are
deep in
almost
the
there.
Sahara, southward
line
into
and
the
follow
Mali
him.
Empire and beyond, where salt was scarce and gold was comparatively abundant. Historical accounts describe caravans of thousands of camels crossing brutal desert terrain, specifically to move slabs of salt to markets in cities like Timbuktu, where the mineral commanded prices that could genuinely rival gold by weight. A striking illustration of how relative scarcity, not intrinsic rarity, determines value. Salt taxes became one of the most reliable and most resented forms of government revenue across medieval and early modern Europe, precisely because salt was a necessity. Nobody could simply choose not to buy. France's infamous gabelle, a salt tax first formalized in the 14th century, required households to purchase a minimum quantity of heavily taxed salt each year, regardless of actual need, with severe penalties, including forced labor or execution in extreme cases, for anyone caught evading it through smuggling. The gabelle grew so deeply hated over the centuries that it became one of the specific grievances cited by revolutionaries in the lead-up to the French Revolution in 1789, a basic necessity of life that came to symbolize the arbitrary and predatory nature of royal financial extraction from ordinary people. The revolutionary government abolished the gabelle almost immediately after seizing power, a clear signal of just how central salt taxation had become to popular resentment of the old regime. But no salt tax in history produced a more consequential act of resistance than British colonial policy in India. Under British colonial rule, the government imposed a strict monopoly on salt production and a corresponding tax, making it illegal for Indians to produce or collect their own salt, even along their own coastlines, where seawater could be evaporated freely, forcing the population instead to buy heavily taxed salt controlled by the colonial state. Given that salt was, as it had always been, an absolute biological necessity that every single person needed regardless of income, the tax fell disproportionately hard on India's poorest citizens, who paid the same tax on this essential mineral as the wealthy. In March of 1930, Mahatma Gandhi launched what became known as the Salt March, a deliberately symbolic act of civil disobedience against this specific colonial policy. Gandhi and a growing group of followers walked roughly 240 miles from his ashram in Sabarmati to the coastal town of Dandi, arriving on April 6, 1930.
Keep moving, we are almost
there. In front of a massive crowd
and
and extensive press coverage, Gandhi bent down, picked up a small lump of natural salt from the shore, and symbolically broke British law by producing salt outside the government monopoly. The act itself was almost absurdly small, a pinch of salt taken from a beach. But its symbolic power was enormous, and it deliberately was. Gandhi had chosen salt precisely because it was a necessity that touched every single Indian, regardless of religion, caste, or class, making it perhaps the single most universally relatable grievance available around which to organize mass resistance. The Salt March triggered a wave of similar acts of civil disobedience across India, with people producing and selling illegal salt openly in open defiance of British law. And it drew enormous international press attention to the independence movement in a way few previous actions had managed. British authorities responded with mass arrests, ultimately detaining roughly 60,000 people, including Gandhi himself, in the following months. The march did not immediately end British rule, and salt production remained under British control for years afterward.
This gold is pure.
But it is widely regarded by historians as a pivotal turning point that galvanized the broader Indian independence movement, demonstrated the power of nonviolent civil disobedience on a mass scale, and drew sustained global attention to India's struggle against colonial rule in a way that helped set the stage for independence, which India would ultimately achieve in 1947. By the 20th century, industrial advances had permanently transformed salt from a scarce, fiercely guarded resource into an abundant, cheap commodity. Large-scale solution mining, mechanized rock salt extraction, and modern evaporation techniques made it possible to produce salt at a scale and cost that would have seemed almost unimaginable to a Roman soldier receiving it as partial pay, or to a West African trader exchanging it ounce for ounce against gold. Today, global salt production exceeds 250 million tons annually, and the overwhelming majority of it is not even used for human consumption at all, but rather for industrial purposes, road de-icing, and chemical manufacturing, with table salt for cooking, representing only a small fraction of total global output. That collapse in scarcity is, in a strange way, the entire story of salt's arc through human history. A substance that once justified taxation systems severe enough to provoke revolutions, that funded trans-Saharan empires, that gave us the very word we use for a paycheck, and that became the specific focal point of one of the most consequential acts of civil resistance in the 20th century, now sits in a plastic shaker on nearly every table on Earth, available for pennies. Its ancient power almost entirely forgotten by the people who use it every single day without a second thought. The next time you reach for the salt shaker, Consider that the substance in your hand once justified execution for smugglers in France, sparked a Chinese imperial policy debate recorded for posterity, moved across the Sahara in camel caravans worth their weight in gold, and was, quite literally, picked up off a beach by Mahatma Gandhi in one of the most famous acts of resistance in modern history. If this story surprised you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Drop a comment and tell us what everyday ingredient you want us to dig into next.